getting the job done out in Seattle, and then on to Los Angeles for a little 4th of July backyard red, white, and blue celebration. That'll be kind of fun watching the Orioles play out there. I was in L.A. last year on the 4th of July, so been there and done that. It was a little warm and moist. It'll be better in HD. I've been waiting a few weeks to bring this guy on. It is a little breezy holiday weekend here, and those of you watching out on the YouTube channel or WNSTV channel on Facebook can see that I am wearing the original Baltimore Ravens hat that was gifted to me by John Ogden via Eddie Carroll on April the 19th, 1996, when the Baltimore Ravens selected John Ogden as well as Ray Lewis. Ozzie Newsome is still here selecting football players, and we've had a pretty good little 2-decade run. This, I guess, will be the summer that I chase down every Benny Thompson and Ernest Biner and Kevin Byrne and David Modell and anybody else with memories of the 1996 Barney Ravens or the Raisins or kicking the dogs or the Browns or all the awful things we were called. But 20 years later, some will come to document it. Eric Edholm is doing it and reached to me back, maybe it was in April or May. He is an NFL writer and Yahoo Sports shutdown corner guy. You can follow his journey out on Twitter, and thousands do, at Eric_Edholm. Eric, please do tell that all of this 1996 Ravens research you've done will be coming out in some sort of blog format soon, man.
I think it's going to be a two-parter, actually. I as you mentioned, all those guys you just mentioned, Kevin Byrne, David Modell, Benny Thompson, Ernest Biner, I got a hold of all of them. Vinny Testaverde has eluded me so far, but I've gotten pretty much every one of the
Vinny eluded me too, don't worry. And he liked me. He just eluded me. It's the way Vinny was.
He's more elusive after his career than he was during it, apparently. But I have had a blast going back and talking to the members of the 96 team. I've gotten almost all the coaches and front office guys as well. Eric Mangini and Jim Schwartz were quality control guys in those teams, as you and I have talked about. And, it's funny to hear some of the stories of what it was like that first season from afar, because I wasn't there locally. But
I remember it all. I was there for all of the Wild Circus ride. It was fantastic. Let me tell you that.
Yeah, right. I mean, one of the more interesting 4-12 teams in NFL history, I'd have to say. So it's long snapper. Probably for next week after the holiday, we'll get that out and on Yahoo Shutdown Corner.
All right. Well, and I'll bring you back on maybe to even sort of wrap it up a couple of weeks from now. And obviously, I've never really been closer to any team than the 96 Ravens, because the team came here. No one in the media cared. And I'm not being a dick. I'm just being honest. They were such a second citizen. There were bruised feelings everywhere. The old Colts fans kind of hated him. The young people like myself said, this is my team. Everyone like me had a team we gave up. I was a Houston Oiler fan, and they were in the same division. We played our second game against them at the Astrodome, which was sort of a magical thing for me. And I just went all purple. It was like, cold turkey and drinking or smoking or drugs, I went off. The Oilers were a drug for me, bro. I love the Oilers, and I gave them up and decided I was, going to go all in with the Ravens, and people gave up the Steelers, and some folks, some great friends of mine were Browns fans because of the Ernie Accorsi connection. They had sort of adopted the Browns. The Browns and the Colts kind of had the same sort of gritty thing going on in common, but how reviled they were around sports, how Art Modell couldn't come out of the house, and David's trying to run the team, and they had no money, and they're playing at a dilapidated stadium, and there were mutinies all over the bounty, right? Let's start with Steve Everett, who I loved, and I drank a lot of beer with Steve Everett. We went to a Kiss concert together. First time I saw Kiss back with makeup on, and Everett had never seen them. We had a big night. I love Steve, but boy, did he hate the Modells. It sounds like Kinchin had a lot to say as well. Just front to back, give me how you're going to paint this story, because I was kind of inside the walls of Bill Tessendorf there, running around trying to paint the walls of an old police academy. Those were hard times, but boy, oh boy, it makes for a good book, man. Trust me.
Oh, and right. And I read your book. That was a huge part of the story, given that background. And you're right. It was funny because from the players' perspective, they said, look, we came from Cleveland. we had this incredible tradition. This is almost what all of them said to it, except for a couple of outliers. But yeah, I mean, they came from the Browns where, as Rob Burnett said, we were 5-11 one year and we would still have 80,000 people there. It was crazy. Like the love for that team was so good. The shock of leaving Cleveland, coming to Baltimore, knowing that they had kind of gone through the same thing, 12 years earlier. He said it was kind of surreal. Like people were excited to have football back, but they didn't know what to make of this team with like the purple colors and it had a cool local name. And he said it was a little confusing at first. He said there was like, Johnny U came and that was huge. And like, okay, everybody started saying, well, if Johnny U likes them, maybe they're okay, even though he's going around on the sideline saying, what the hell's going on with these uniforms? And, okay, I still need to get this thing to soak in my head a little bit. But you're right. It was a rinky-dink thing going on with, as Eric DaCosta was saying, like, one day I'm taking a guy to the hospital. One day I'm driving Ted Marchibretta to his college, roommate's funeral. The next day I'm painting a wall and refiling the video cabinet. He said it was just like, you had to wear about 7 hats. David Modell doing what he had to do. And so, yeah, it was basically everybody had like 6 jobs, whereas everybody now in the NFL has like half a job.
And there's like sort of, Cleveland's trying to sue them, right? They're trying to pick out a logo that later went into deep dispute, so much so that they had to get rid of the logo. The hat I'm wearing right now had no logo, and, I was up at the, I was called the Paramount Theater then, the Felt Forum, and now it's, I don't know what the hell they call it now. It's got some corporate name on it, underneath the Madison Square Garden. And, the bat phone that drafted John Ogden and Ray Lewis had no logo on it. They looked like, and Marvin Lewis would always call on this, the mean machine, right? And if you have John Ogden's first football card, they're wearing those sort of prison Penn State issued, threads. And I mean, it really was, looking back on it, it was quite a circus. And, the Ken Rosenthals, who were the columnists, would, routinely make fun of the franchise. Meanwhile, Angelos is effing up the Orioles. It's 1996. The Orioles are good, but not good enough. Angelos is in the front page of the newspaper every day, doing something, manufacturing some headline. And Davey Johnson's running around, and Cal Ripken and Messina are in their prime. There's 48,000 every night at Camden Yards. And, these guys are running around in purple Barney outfits with a colorblind quarterback, right? And the same coach they had 20 years ago, who was hey diddle diddle, Lydell up the middle and all that stuff. It really was. And Bob Trumpy's pissing on us on the broadcast on the first game. Bob Costas comes in, lays a steamer on the field, and walks off and doesn't even stay for the game. They're flying planes around Memorial Stadium that says, jump Art, land on David. You know what I mean? Like, literally, this stuff is going on as I'm distributing Dump Trumpy and Get Nasty signs and loving the Ravens. And 20 years later, the Ravens are the toast of the town. The Orioles are in first place, and no one seems to mind or care. And the Ravens own the joint, and Ray Lewis has a statue down at the stadium, and everybody here wanted us to draft Lawrence Phillips and Leland McElroy.
I mean, right. I mean, where do you start with all that stuff? It's like, Ray Lewis started the preseason as a personal protector. Jonathan Ogden wasn't even the left tackle at that point. Nobody knew that these guys were going to be superstars. Nobody knew whether Vinny Testaverde could come back and have a 4,000-yard season. There were so many unknowns that I go back and look at, and the guys are saying, hell, we were just looking for places to live. And here's another funny story back to the uniform and just the nature of the team. One of the coaches, I'm trying to remember who it was, said he was filling out an application for an apartment, and he wrote Baltimore Ravens as his employer. And the woman reading the application said, "What's that?" Imagine that. Like, you don't. He said, well, it's the football team. So what is that like? Canadian football? Is that the arena team?
Well, the Canadian football team sits on the back end of this story too. The Canadian Football League team won the Grey Cup the same week Modell moved the team here.
It's crazy. I mean, right. And you had this, it's like people appreciated football, but I think, like you said, there was still this sort of like, we got a team. It's called the Ravens. They're wearing purple and black and okay, and we've got this. Weren't there about 5 or 6 different calls? Like there was like a caw thing and a I mean, they were trying to build this tradition, and they threw darts against the wall. Some worked, some darts fell out of the wall, sadly, like you'd had about 10 beers, and so it was just this feeling out process with the team, the city, the players. Guys like Everett weren't embracing the team. Brian Kinchin were not embracing the team. And then you had some like Benny Thompson and Donnie Brady who were like, dude, I'm just glad to be here and be somewhere where I have a job. I'm playing a lot. And, okay, and the fans are starting to kind of warm up to this thing a little bit as time goes on. So it was just so funny to hear the different perspectives of what was actually happening.
Eric Edholm joining us here from Yahoo Sports, doing a three-part series now on the 1996 Baltimore Ravens. He reached out to me a number of weeks ago and has been in chase of all of these 1996 Ravens. And I could go through the list of the Dan Footmans and the Rob Burnett's and the Anthony Pleasants, and I have my own stories with Eric Turner and Marvin Lewis Lowe these many years later. Marvin always likes to tell me to this day he's the only man on earth that has received paychecks from the Cleveland Browns, the Baltimore Ravens, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Cincinnati Bengals. And he reminds me that the Browns were actually paying his paychecks when he was working in Baltimore. Those first couple of months, the checks came from the Cleveland Browns. Who were not at all pleased to be in Baltimore. And 20 years later, I'm sure we're still popping off to you about it, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I was surprised about Kinchin because I remember talking to him in what final game when he won a in the season to long snap, and he was. I mean, I had a good time talking to him or whatever. But
I remember him as quite charming, by the way. So just, my memory of him was he would come out to the barn with us, and he was a very intelligent, well-spoken, a guy you wanted to have a beer and talk football with. I mean, literally.
Right. And that's how I remember him from came in for the Patriots that year. But, yeah, he had a miserable experience. He felt, deceived by Ozzie Newsome. He felt deceived by Scott O'Brien, the special teams coach. He felt like he was let down by some teammates. And, he ended up having kind of a career year by statistical standards for him. And for him, it was like, I just wanted that bonus check. And, I was in that year where I was kind of like stuck in free agency. I had no real options. I was kind of just, told I was going to be here basically. And all I wanted to do was cash in that game. He got it. I think it was against the Oilers, second to last game, whatever it was. And he caught enough passes to where he finished a certain amount of the, receptions. And he said, I just couldn't wait to get out of there. I knew I had a job, but, he felt like people there were deceiving him. So I think it was a personal experience. Everett, as you mentioned, just had a supreme dislike for the Modells because he had really embraced Cleveland, and he felt like the Modells were just ready to move on, and that he had just bought a condo in Cleveland, and hey, I just bought a condo, and he said, great. And they said, great, we want you here for life. And then he said, looking back, they knew at the time they were moving to Baltimore. So basically, they're sitting there lying to my face. So those personal still run pretty deep for some of those guys.
Well, obviously, the whole move and the scars from the move is there really was no preparation, right? I mean, I would think that Mr. Kroenke had been thinking about where to put the Rams offices several years ago,
Sure.
I don't know. I know this for a fact that all of David's struggles now are well documented, with his health situation, and we had him out to our event in May. I don't think David Modell was in August even thinking about we're going to move the team in November. I mean, this thing came about, and it was a shotgun, very, very And, and I think one of the things the Modells knew about was that Baltimore had this tradition with football and that there would be people here, maybe much more so than where the Rams are right now, that people would want to run out and have this list of season tickets. And, in 1993, we had an expansion thing together here. There were 3 sets of owners that wanted to plop down here and have the money printing machine of a new stadium at the Harbor, and they saw what the Orioles represented and knew that there was still deep affinity for the National Football League here and the Johnny Unitas's and all of that. So someone was going to make money on the deal, and John Moog was, pretty clear on that. But the shotgun part of this really plays into the anarchy that it was, because it really wasn't all that premeditated.
Right, especially when you hear about, from the league office's perspective, about how, guys like Paul Tagliabue and Roger Goodell, who was, one of his kind of underlings at that point, and, other league officials kind of sitting in a hotel in New York saying, this actually happened. What do we do now? Like, they were, even though the wheels were in motion for a little while, I think people obviously felt like there would be that Hail Mary pass. There would be that last-minute deal. There would be that saving grace that comes in and says, okay, the Browns are staying, sorry, Baltimore, whatever, and it never happened. It just didn't happen. And so Art got past a certain point. David wasn't going to lockstep with him, and the Cleveland Browns were moving. And all of a sudden, the NFL now had to say, whoa, we got to figure something out quick, because we got a lot of pissed off fans. We've got a tradition that essentially gets erased. And I think they probably made the best of a bad deal there on both ends. Obviously, the Ravens have become a and a model organization. They weren't that at the time. The Browns haven't become that same, obviously their losing is now well documented, but at least we've been able to kind of preserve some of that tradition a little bit.
I have been the defenders of the flag for the Modells from the beginning for a lot of reasons. I just think at heart, over a couple of decades that I've known them and the decades in Cleveland, they've done a lot more good than harm. They certainly have done more good for our community. They just didn't carpetbag in like what Bidwell did in Arizona and sit around for 2 decades and suck, or what Irsay did in Indianapolis, was sit around for a decade and a half until he died and sucked. They came in here and tried doing things the right way from the very beginning, with every step, with every player out in the organization and doing stuff, despite the Ray Lewis problems and the Jamal Lewis problems and the inherent controversies around all of that. I would agree with you. And, how old are you, Eric? How many? Feels like you've been covering the NFL as long as me, but I have no frame of reference with you and how long you've been doing this.
Yeah, I turned 40 last year, and I started covering NFL in earnest at about 2000, 2001. So really, I did a little bit in 99 and early 2000, but I didn't really start covering the NFL full-time until 2002.
As I'm 47, early 70s as a kid, and I started my media career in the mid-80s, but this isn't really about media. It's more about perception, right? So you say the Cleveland Browns are a joke, and I think any kid that's 20, 25 years of age would look at the Cleveland Browns as being an absolute disgrace in the way that they've been run, as well as some other the Philadelphia 76ers would be in that pile now, maybe the Padres or some bad baseball teams out there but, in general, I look at like the San Jose Sharks, even in the finals, as being a bit of an expansion team. I look at the Carolina Panthers in Jacksonville as sort of Jacksonville's another place that's kind of a joke, right? And you look at them and think they're a perennial. The Ravens feel like they've been in a league 100 years. Maybe I'm too close to it, but they feel like a part of the establishment, not sort of one of those franchises with trying to change their uniforms every year and trying to catch on, trying to sell tickets. The Ravens are a bit of an institution, and it is amazing 20 years later, because I know the things you're writing about, what a mess this was and what a mess they inherited. To your they've really become very, very far away from what that was.
Yeah, and right, you and I grew up in a sports era where the Cleveland Browns and the Toronto Maple Leafs had, great traditions to where you thought, okay, even if they didn't win a championship, you still knew, okay, there's a level of respect there, what they've done historically and everything. Well, now you look at these organizations and you just think, armpit. I mean,
Right,
it's
exactly.
on that bad. And so I do feel like there is a younger generation that maybe forgets where some of these teams came from and what they built previously. Now, that doesn't give them, that only buys you so much. But, right, I mean, I think it is funny now in this expansion era where we have a team like the Jaguars that, haven't really kind of established themselves, but they had a run there from 96 to 2000, whatever, 10-year span where they weren't too bad at all, and they were actually probably better than the Carolina Panthers were, but the Panthers have made a couple Super Bowls. They have Cam Newton, and so, even the Houston Texans, they've got J.J. Watt. They've had some winning seasons, whatever. So it's funny to see how these newer teams almost get off without being sort of logged down with some of the history of the other ones.
Eric Edholm joining us here from Yahoo. He's working on a 3-part series on the 1996 Ravens. Not so much the move, but just more like storytelling, and reached to me a couple of months ago about this piece. It's coming out next week. You can check it out at Yahoo. Eric out on Twitter as well at Eric_Edholm. That's EDHOLM. I am pronouncing that correct, right, Eric?
That's correct.
Okay,
yeah.
Make
Most people
sure.
botch that, but that was well done. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I remember Eric Soderholm and, in that direction. But, I guess the last thing on the Ravens as sort of civic joke, and we could talk about the Browns and maybe even like where the Raiders have been, in all this time. I mean, it really is amazing that Ozzie Newsome's still picking these football players, right? Like the unprecedented of Ray Lewis and John Ogden being Hall of Famers and drafted on the first day, and what a joke the whole thing was, and what a joke the Browns have become since then. But all of this really does stem in large part to Paul Tagliabue and the people involved in the sport at that time that said, We want to be in Jacksonville, screw Baltimore. Jack Kane Cook doesn't want a team there. He wants to plop a stadium down in Bowie halfway between the two. He wants to claim them both. All of that was going on politically behind all of this. And the bleeding hearts that still remember the Colts and what Irsay initially did to Baltimore and trying to make it whole, they had a chance to do that in expansion, and they had no interest in ever having a team in Baltimore. So, it really is, having done 25 years of radio here and thinking for long stretches, we were never, ever getting an NFL team. Eric, I went on the radio after expansion, and I said I would run naked, literally, through the streets of Baltimore if we ever got a team. That's how sure I was that we were never getting a team. You can Google Nasty Naked Run right now and see me in my underwear with the Hooters girls running up Charles Street with cabbies handing me 20s for my charity, because that's how sure I was we were never getting a team. This is still, and I'm on video, it's a pinch me thing. I remember referring to it as a miracle that this city ever got an NFL team. I don't think that's appreciated by some of the snot noses that run around here, with their Super Bowl hats and parade memories and, Ray Lewis bobbleheads and Joe Flacco helmets and all that stuff. But this was never supposed to happen. Really screwed the Jacksonville thing up because they went to Jacksonville and Carolina, and Baltimore by far has been the rose in that.
Yeah, right. And, you were probably about the second or third or fourth person I talked to for this story. And as you were kind of explaining that element of the story, I'd always kind of looked at it from the Browns' perspective. Wow, this team is storied tradition, lose the team. So hearing it from that really for the first time, how much of a Hail Mary it was more to get that team, how dominant the Orioles were, all of that, you were the first one to kind of open my eyes to that. Now, when I asked players about it, they weren't from Baltimore.
They do know that the Orioles were a big deal, and they weren't.
Yeah.
They definitely would tell you that.
Yeah, they knew it. And they talked about how, it took a while to kind of earn those fans and all that stuff. Even though there was that support, okay, we love this and all that. I mean, really, they had no idea. It really wasn't until you talked to the people who, like Jim Schwartz, for instance. He was a Baltimore guy who just happened to be thrown into the situation. He said, I grew up there, and I went to Baltimore Colts games. Seeing this team come back was surreal for him. It was like, whoa.
There's no doubt about it.
Happening. And I'm a part of it. So it was cool to hear the couple of perspectives from the people who knew Baltimore football from the beginning, or their experience with it, and then coming back. They just said it was like, wow, this is like you said, a pinch me moment.
Well, Bob Eller's one of my favorite people. Who's a Baltimore guy who was an intern with the Colts, had to get on the bus and go out to Indianapolis. Ernie, wound up in Cleveland and brought him to Cleveland, and he wound up on the bus back to his hometown 20 years ago. He's an incredible. It still sets every travel arrangement, makes every flight, every hotel arrangement, is always there in a suit before and after games, and the amount of pride he must have in those 2 purple rings is just got to be off the charts. I mean, really, Kevin Byrne picked his whole life up from Cleveland and moved here and is still here and has had 2 rings. I mean, there are people behind the scenes in this story that never wore a helmet that are still a part of the story in a way that they could only appreciate the whole ride, right? Even a guy like Marvin Lewis that was in Pittsburgh one week, Baltimore the next week, and has now moved on to Cincinnati and has tried to beat Baltimore and still has this incredible affinity, and he only has one piece of jewelry, and it says Baltimore on it.
Yeah, and that's another part of the story, too, is that, you see so much turnover in the NFL. You see people coming and going and leaving, and this, as you mentioned a little bit ago, Ozzie was the godfather, the centerpiece, whatever you want to call it. I mean, he was the kind of the
He's touched everything, right? Like, everything about Cleveland, everything about the Modells, everything about the Browns, everything about Jim Brown. He's touched all that, and then everything he's Willy Wonka here in a purple jacket, literally, man, right?
I think that's right, exactly. And he keeps so, everything's so compartmentalized with him. He doesn't listen to the noise and the distractions, and people still want to come. Eric DeCosta could have been a GM for 4 different teams. George Kokinis left and came back. There are other guys who were elsewhere and realized, man, it's pretty darn good in Baltimore. I can work for Ozzie Newsome. I can learn from that man. I can be next to him. I'm fine being more of a bit player. It's just to hear everybody say everything kind of led back to Ozzie. And sometimes guys like that get mythologized and all that. I really, truly believe that Ozzie should get another Hall of Fame mention for what he's done. It's been so impressive to see how little attention he seeks and how much he gets because of the respect he's earned for, years and years.
Eric Edholm writing about the 1996 Baltimore Ravens, and it's a far more interesting story than you think. I once wrote a book about it, and I think you will unearth a really cool story. I mean, I don't know. Look, I'm sure there are great stories everywhere, and having been a part of this one, again, on the inside of all of this stuff, and having, deep memories, and quite frankly, I think it's one of the reasons I would tell people they should listen to my radio show or should value my opinion, because I do have a point of view on that you could only have on the football team from having really been around all of that the whole time to appreciate this thing that was, universally frowned upon, that has become this beautiful thing for our community here, quite frankly.
I think people have to realize sort of where everything came from, and to tell a story, obviously, it's not just the here, today and yesterday. It's also, let's look back 20 years and see and I think that'll be one of the surprises for Ravens fans. Like you said, the ones who are in their 20s and 30s who, may have been in grade school or not even, paying attention to football at the time. To see that, my goodness, this thing was kind of scotch taped together for a couple of years before it really took off. And I think there were just so many interesting angles to this whole thing. Memorial, the Browns, Rockstar Group, the front office, really interesting lot. How
about Marcia Broda? I mean, having been a part of both of them, right?
Hey, one quick story on Marcia Broda. This is a Benny Thompson special. We'll have to ask him about it. They're playing the Steelers. They're getting their butts kicked early in the season. Marcia Broda tries to tip over an empty trash can. This is a 67 or 8-year-old man, whatever. Out of anger, I'm going to show these players how angry I am at halftime. He can't do it. The thing doesn't even knock over. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is try to rally these guys and say, come on, we can beat them in the second half. Come on, you Colts. Oh. And everybody's going, Ted, we're the Ravens. Not the Colts anymore. And it took him I just say. So stories about this meshed together coaching staff. Ted Marchibroda, a couple older guys, the new ones who Belichick brought in.
And a bunch of, now legendary guys involved with that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, from Kirk Ferentz and Pat Hill and what they've done in college football. And you mentioned Eric Mangini, not to mention all the scouting staff and Phil Savage. And then the old Maxie Bonds, the guys that came from the old era along with Ted as well.
I talked to Don Strock, and Mangini's telling me about Strock using an old 1950s typewriter to type out his scouting reports and smoking cigarettes, and these offices had 2 and 3 coaches jammed into a room. The whole thing feels like it was from a totally different era. That's what made this story so interesting to me. It was 1996. I mean, I was finishing college. It didn't seem like that long ago, and yet when you hear some of these stories, like Rob Burnett, Cleveland. Guys were drinking, smoking unfiltered cigarettes. He said, this, North Dallas 40 type stuff that I didn't think existed. It wasn't that long ago. This was one generation ago or whatever. So I had a blast putting all this together, and I think the readers will really enjoy it.
Well, I'm going to have a blast reading it. Eric Edholm covers all things NFL, but when he's bored, he does what good writers do, going 96 Baltimore Ravens, pretty good story. When's that coming out now that we've teased all the purple folks here at a time of grave need, right? I mean, there's nothing going on in the NFL, and I always tell people, we have this text service here. It's our best by Coon Sport, and it's breaking news. And I'm like, if you get breaking news this time of the year from us on the Ravens, it's not good. It's not good at all, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. I'm hoping that, that there aren't any Ravens or any other NFL players, for that matter, arrested over the 4th of July weekend, so that when you come back, you settle in, you've done too much partying, you can enjoy a good 2-part story. I think it'll be right after the week after the 4th, so it'll be sometime after Tuesday next week, and we're still figuring out exactly what day we want it to drop.
Whenever it's there, they follow you on Twitter, they can always find it, and I'm sure I'll be bragging on it again, and probably, if there's anything really inflammatory, I'm going to have to get on the bat phone with Steve Everett down there in Longboat Key or wherever the hell he's kicking it these days in Miami. And
he just redid his roof. He's in good shape now, he told me. He's down there. He's waiting for a call.
I haven't had Everett on in 20 years, I don't think, but I saw him in Cleveland. They honored him at Cleveland at a Ravens game 3-4 years ago, and he was still having fun with the media and poking fun. But and he's not real popular here for those who remember him. But I love the guy.
If you get him going on Jim Harbaugh too, he has some fun stuff to say. So we had a blast. I was asking, I was trying to hang up with him, and he wouldn't stop. So I was having a good time.
I'll wind him up. I'm gonna wind them all up. I mean, you've given me great inspiration for some July and August programming, Eric. Hey, we'll send everybody out there, and to Eric _Edholm, as well as at Yahoo Sports and Shutdown Corner. Eric working hard on a 1996 retrospective of a 4-12 effort that was much more than the record, right?
Exactly. This story, throw the records out, right? I mean, this was a lot of fun, and there were some wild stories that I don't think haven't been told in about 20 years. So I think people will have fun reading it. You
got it, man. Always great having you on, Eric. Be well.
Thanks, Nestor.
He's out in Chicago, Illinois. You can follow him at Eric _Edholm. You can find me in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device. Download the TuneIn Radio app. We come in crystal clear. And, of course, every morning at 7 a.m., we deliver the WNST morning newspaper to your email inbox. It's brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Last but never least, breaking news happens first on that WNST tech service. Sign up and find out how awesome it is. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis will be here on Thursday driving you home as we get the first place Orioles out on the West Coast in Seattle, and then to Dodger Stadium. Hope you're enjoying your hot dogs, your hamburgers, your family, your beer, your watermelon, your beach, your lightning bugs, corn on the cob. Don't forget the corn on the cob. For God's sake, don't do that. And whatever you're doing, drive safely. Enjoy the weekend. I'm Nestor. This is WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Taos in Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports. Eric, great stuff, man. Thanks for coming on.